Jorge Luis Borges' short story, Emma Zunz, is a very interesting tale of revenge, which doesn't go awry but doesn't pan out precisely as the titular heroine, Emma, envisions that it's going to go. And if we look at the very ending of it, I think it's a fitting place to begin. The last paragraph reads, "The story was unbelievable, yes, and yet it convinced everyone because in substance it was true. Emma Zunz's tone of voice was real, her shame was real, her hatred was real. The outrage that had been done to her was real as well. All that was false were the circumstances, the time, and one or two proper names." So in a certain way, this is about truth and justice, and there's enough of the truth there for justice, what is fitting in these circumstances to be done, namely by the killing, and we could also read into this the destruction of the reputation of this person, Loewenthal, who has a role in the reason why the most important person, presumably to Emma, her father, will die himself in disgrace. So let's begin now at the actual beginning. We read, on January 14th, 1922, when Emma Zunz returned home from the tar book in Loewenthal weaving mill, she found a letter at the far end of the entryway to her building. It had been sent from Brazil, and it informed her that her father had died. And so she, reads it, and she finds out that Senor Meyer had accidentally ingested an overdose of Veronal and died in the third inst in the hospital at Bagué. So she is being informed that her father, who is now living under an alias, Manuel Meyer, who had been formerly Emmanuel Zunz, has passed away. And we're going to read the first thing she felt was a sinking in her stomach and a trembling in her knees, then a sense of blind guilt, of unreality, of cold and fear, then a desire for this day to be past. Then immediately she realized such a wish was pointless. And we get this very interesting reflection. Her father's death was the only thing that had happened in the world, and it would go on happening endlessly forever after. So this is the central event of her life, so to speak. Now, there's other central events as well. The revenge that she is going to take on Loewenthal, and we'll talk about why she does that in just a moment. And, there's other recollections as well, but why would her father's death be the only thing that happened in the world? Because it's the one thing that ends up being decisive. So she weeps over the suicide of her father. She recalls summer outings to a small farm. She recalled or tried to recall her mother. She recalled the family's little house in Lanús that had been sold at auction. She recalled the lozenge of a window, recalled the verdict of prison, the disgrace, the anonymous letters with the newspaper article about the embezzlement of funds by Teller recalled, and that on the last night, so here's the very important recollection that sets everything into motion, her father had sworn that the thief was Loewenthal. Aaron Loewenthal, formerly the manager of the mill, now one of its owners, the place where she is working. And she had kept the secret since 1916. Loewenthal didn't know that she knew, and she has a certain sense of power coming from that. And he's speculating, Borges, about why she kept the secret, even from her best friend, maybe out of profane incredulity. Perhaps she thought the secret was the link between herself and the absent man, her father, who clearly was very, very important in her life. So what does she do? She's going to develop a plan that will set things right in a certain way. So we read she goes to the gymnasium with her friends and acts as if everything is normal. They make some plans. She makes herself some soup at home, makes herself go to sleep. And then she wakes up on Saturday out of impatience. This is the remarkable sense of relief she'd reached this day at last. So she's been thinking about this for a while. Within a few hours, she would have come to the simplicity of the fait accompli, having done the act. And it's a complex plan. So we read here that she reflected that the final step of this plan would be less horrible than the first and would give her, she had no doubt of it, a taste of victory and of justice. So we've got her motivation. She's very interested in seeing justice being done. And she takes out the letter. She thinks nobody should be able to see it. She reads it again, and then she tears it up. She's covering her tracks in a way, right? So then Borges says a few interesting things here, and then we'll get to what the plan actually is. To recount with some degree of reality the events of that evening would be difficult and perhaps inappropriate. One characteristic of hell is its unreality, which might be thought to mitigate hell's terrors, but perhaps makes them all the worse. How to recover those brief hours of chaos that Emma Zunz's memory today repudiates and confuses. And so what does she do? She goes down to the docks where a particular ship has berthed, and she deliberately picks up a sailor to have sex with for the first time. She is losing her virginity, and we find out that she goes into 2 or 3 bars. She observes the routine or maneuvers of the other women. She's learning from them. Then she meets a young sailor, and she feared he might inspire in her some hint of tenderness. So she picks a different guy, older, shorter, foul-mouthed, not somebody she would actually be attracted to. And they do have sex. And there's this very interesting, 2 reflections there. One is she sees her father in a somewhat different light because she realizes that the way in which she got there into the world is her father doing precisely this to her mother, but that doesn't change the need for this rectification and revenge that she's imposing on Loewenthal. And then we read at the end of this sort of vignette, he was an instrument for Emma as she was for him. So they're both instruments for each other, but for different motives. For him, she is an instrument for pleasure. He gets to have sex with her, he wants to do that, and he'll actually pay for it, as we're going to find out. For her, she doesn't desire having sex with him. She does have sex with him because he is an instrument for justice as part of this plan that we're going to see. So she wakes up, opens her eyes, and there's money on the table. She tears it up to shreds as she tore up the letter a short time before. And then she feels that she's maybe made a mistake. Tearing up money is an act of impiety, like throwing away bread. The minute she did it, Emma wished she hadn't. An act of pride. And on that day, foreboding melted into the sadness of her body, into the revulsion. So this is what she's feeling as a reaction to having had sex with this man. Sadness and revulsion. They lay upon her like chains, but she got up and began to dress. Then she rides to Loewenthal's place. He lives above the mill alone. His friends know him as a miser, and money is his true passion. And we also read about him With secret shame, he knew he was not as good at earning it as in holding on to it. And here's another very interesting feature of him, which I think we can say many people are like this. He was quite religious. He believed he had a secret pact with the Lord. In return for prayers and devotions, he was exempted from doing good works. So, like many religious people, praying, feeling certain things, being devoted, that means you don't have to behave like an actual Christian, which he didn't. He embezzled, he blamed somebody else, and we're going to find out that he will have his reputation destroyed by the end of this. So we're going to read here, things will not turn out the way that she had foreseen. So how are things going to go wrong? Since early the previous morning, many times, she had dreamed that she would point the revolver at him, force the miserable wretch to confess his miserable guilt, and then explain the daring stratagem that would allow God's justice to triumph over man's. So she wants to make him admit what he did was wrong, and then explain how she is going to take revenge on him for what he did to her father, and in many respects up to what he did to her in the process by ruining her father. And it goes on, why would God's justice triumph? Because she wouldn't actually get punished. It was not out of fear, but because she was an instrument of that justice, that she intended not to be punished, and she won't be punished. And then a single bullet would put an end to his life. What happens instead? Well, she is going to feel a kind of, as it's going to say here, an urgency to punish the outrage she herself had suffered. She could not kill him after being so fully and thoroughly dishonored. How so? By something she's chosen herself as a way to get back at him, having sex with the sailor, something that she finds to be disgusting, lowering, besmirching her. She is blaming him for what she has taken on. And what's going to end up happening is she invokes, the obligations entailed by loyalty, mentions few names, and stops short as though overcome by fearfulness. He goes off to the next room to get her a glass of water. She goes into his desk and gets the revolver. And then he comes back and she shoots him twice. She doesn't get the confession out of him she wanted. She also doesn't get to explain to him what she's doing. And he doesn't die right away. He curses her, as it says in Spanish and in Yiddish. And she fires a third time, finally killing him. And we read here that Emma began the accusation she had prepared. I have avenged my father and I shall not be punished. But she didn't finish it because he was dead. She never knew whether he'd managed to understand. So it's not actually working out the way that she originally had thought it would. And we get, this interesting distinction between the details of her mission that she was focusing on before versus its true nature and final purpose, which are partly realized and partly not. So what ends up happening? Well, we get a false narrative. False in a certain sense. She calls on the phone and says, something has happened, something unbelievable. Senor Loewenthal sent for me on the pretext of the strike. He raped me. I killed him. And then we get this final paragraph. The story was unbelievable, but it convinced everybody. Why? Because her demeanor, and perhaps if she was checked medically, there's evidence that she had had sex, right? And she had a reputation for being a virgin up until that time. Nobody's seen her with these sailors. In substance, the story was true. She feels herself outraged, not just by the fact that this man disgraced and had, her father essentially imprisoned. Her father killed himself as a result, taking away the most important person in her life. So he's really, Loewenthal has done something terrible to her, just not that particular terrible thing. So her shame was real, her hatred was real. What is there in her voice is real. The outrage that had been done to her was real. All that was false, as we see, are the circumstances. It wasn't Loewenthal who did it to her. The time, she did it earlier, and one or two proper names, namely his name, right? So what we get here is a very interesting vignette of a stratagem that raises some interesting questions that Borges doesn't actually explore in any explicit way, but what we could think about. Was she right or wrong in doing this? Was the penalty befitting for Loewenthal, or was it unjust? Is she actually an instrument of God's justice, or is she merely a young woman who is taking revenge for emotional reasons? These are questions that are left open by the story, which I think, if people want to, they could reflect upon and explore.